So I did not welcome you promptly at noon, but I am going to kick off the program promptly at 12:30. How about that? I'm Tom Giovanetti. I'm the president of the Institute for Policy Innovation. We're very delighted that you were able to join us today. I'm particularly excited about this topic and this speaker today with everything that's going on. I want to acknowledge some friends in the room, and I want to tell you a little bit about IPI. But first I want to tell you about the Sumners Foundation. You saw the video. It's a lovely video. But the video doesn't tell half the story. When we first became acquainted with the Sumners Foundation, the name of the foundation was the Sumners Foundation for the Science and Teaching of Self-Government. And what a wonderful name that is. And isn't it good that there's at least one philanthropic foundation out there that is devoted exclusively and focused on making sure the next generation is exposed to good civics, good ideas, so that an informed, educated citizenry is the key to self-government. Self-government doesn't work unless the self part of it has at least a basic understanding of our founding principles, of the Constitution, of basic civics. So we're so pleased to be in partnership with the Sumners Foundation. If you don't know about them, that's one of the benefits of your coming today, because now you do. They're a Dallas treasure, and we appreciate them very much. One of the main things that the Sumners Foundation does is it endows a large number of college scholarships for students. And we have a group of Sumner scholars here today. Where are our Sumner scholars today? Raise your hands. Okay, thank you very much. Let's thank you for coming. We appreciate that. We're delighted that you were able to take time out of your busy college schedules on a Thursday. I know Fridays are better, but this one needed to be on Thursday. But we're very glad that you were able to come. We also have a group here from Founders Classical Academy, which is a charter school in the North Texas area that I'm particularly fond of because my son graduated from there. Where's our group from Founders Classical Academy? Back there in the back. Thank you guys for coming. The Founders Classical Academy is part of a major charter school initiative from Hillsdale College. And they have charter schools all over the country, including a number in Texas, and they do a wonderful job. I know that firsthand because I saw what my son was exposed to. So we're delighted that you guys could be here today. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome my newly elected member of the Texas State House. Where's Richard Hayes? Hey, Richard, congratulations. Richard is a long-time Republican activist in the Denton County area, and he finally took the plunge to actually get in the arena directly. And so, Richard, I'm delighted that you're going to be my representative. I couldn't ask for anything better, so congratulations. And we also have in the room a couple of retired Denton County Republican legends, Jim and Mary Horn. Where are Jim and Mary Horn? Thank you, guys. Mary Horn was, among other things, a Denton County judge, and Jim Horn was, among other things, a member of the Texas legislature. When I first moved to Texas, Jim Horn was my representative. So thank you guys for coming. If you're not familiar with IPI, the Institute for Policy Innovation, we're a 35-year-old free market conservative think tank based in Dallas. We were started by Congressman Dick Armey back when he was in office. We promote a optimistic, Reaganite, conservative viewpoint. We believe our principles are the right principles. We believe in limited government. We believe in free markets. We believe in self-government. There's a lot of churn these days in the conservative movement. We are squarely in the same place that we've always been for 35 years. We believe in a Reagan, Jack Kemp approach to policy. That's what I was grown up on. I became a conservative listening to Ronald Reagan's radio commentaries in the morning before going off to high school, and that's where we are. So if you, like us, believe in that Reaganite limited government, optimistic growth-oriented philosophy. We would be delighted for you to become involved with us, learn more about us. You can go to our website, you can sign up, you'll get invitations to events like this, and you'll find out all about our wonderful podcast and all those sorts of cool things that we do. And if you are so moved by the quality of this experience today, and you would like to become a financial supporter of IPI, you look for Addie Crimmins, who's back there in the back corner. She is, among other things, our Director of Development and Events. And Addie would like nothing better than to guide you through the process of becoming an IPI supporter. A couple housekeeping things. You have note cards and pens on the tables in front of you. We will be doing a moderated Q&A session after Ambassador Bolton's remarks. And so if you have a question that you would like to ask, or if you have a comment that you would like to have addressed, you can write it down on the 3x5 card, and folks will come around and they'll gather those up, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. And my final housekeeping note is we have to ask you to please not rush the stage after lunch for two reasons. First of all, the Secret Service folks will tackle you, number one. But number two, because immediately after lunch, Ambassador Bolton will be doing a private session with the Sumner Scholars. And so we need to get him there. So please don't rush, for your own safety and for the flow of our program, please don't rush the stage afterward. And now let me be very pleased to introduce Ambassador John Bolton. And I feel strongly enough about this that I actually wrote it down. So, there are an awful lot of people with an awful lot of opinions on just about everything, and I suppose I'm one of them at IPI. We get to fire off our hot opinions and op-eds and social media and media appearances and things like that. We get to criticize politicians, we get to critique policy, and if we're wrong, it doesn't really matter. Nobody really pays attention, no one holds us to account. I'm describing the folks who are constantly opinionating 24 hours a day on cable news, and like I said, people who are very active on social media, people like us who write op-eds and things like that. Not that it's not important, but there's a far smaller number of people who actually are in the arena. There's a much smaller number of people who actually are in positions of responsibility, where they have to make crucial decisions, where they have to make crucial recommendations to those in power. And sometimes those decisions and sometimes those recommendations will not necessarily endear them to other people. But because they want to serve their country to the best of their ability, they make the hard choices, they make the tough recommendations, and they have to live with the consequences. These are the people who, and Richard, you're becoming one of these people now. You're going to actually be in the arena. And I think we need to have an appreciation for people who choose to actually devote their time and their lives and their reputations to actually being in the arena. And Ambassador John Bolton is one of those people. He has served in every Republican administration since Ronald Reagan. I learned during the reception that he knew Clarence Thomas in law school. Ambassador Bolton has been in the arena. He has been a key integral part of the conservative movement for decades. Most of that service has been in the crucial area of national security, where there's much at stake, but very often little consensus, and therefore a lot of controversy. Ambassador Bolton, if you don't know this, has earned the ire of those who wish to radically reduce America's role in the world, some of whom we heard from at IPI when we announced this event. And of course, there's a small matter of his life actually being threatened. So Ambassador Bolton has been in the arena. And on top of all that, he possesses an enviable mustache, which we should note. At this moment, we live in a time when the Russian bear has provoked an entirely unjustified and unprovoked attack on a free country, causing death, chaos, and disruption to hundreds of thousands of people. In China, Maoist authoritarianism has returned. And I should point out that because of the ambition of that Maoist authoritarian regime, there's at least some evidence that a dangerous virus was unleashed on the entire world. North Korea is firing missiles at an unprecedented rate over our peaceful ally Japan. Afghanistan was given to the Taliban. The threat of radical Islamic terrorism is always there. And Iran is doing everything they can do to become a nuclear power so that they can wipe Israel off the map. There's a lot going on. So at this time, we at IPI thought that we couldn't think of anyone more experienced and with more knowledge about these topics and these threats than Ambassador John Bolton. We value people like Ambassador Bolton. He's seen the classified briefings we have not seen. He's aware of the threats that we are blissfully unaware of. And he's offered his service to us, to the nation, to protect us. Making decisions and making choices that will not necessarily land him on the cover of People magazine. Ambassador Bolton has been consistent intellectually and philosophically throughout his entire career. He's maintained his integrity. He's told the truth. We're honored to have him here today. For our final Sumner's Distinguished Lecture Series luncheon of 2022, the Institute for Policy Innovation is pleased to present Ambassador John Bolton. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Bolton.
Well, Tom, thank you very much, and thanks for the Sumner's Foundation and IPI for inviting me here to Dallas. I'm delighted to be here and have an opportunity to get together with all of you. The timing, I think, turns out to be particularly interesting since we've just finished the 2022 election, and yesterday the 2024 campaign began. Actually, it began before that, but nobody wanted to admit it. And it really raises what, for me, is one of the critical failings that we've got in our political system today, is that our leaders, for a long time, unfortunately, have not spent an adequate part of their attention span speaking with the citizens of this country about the threats that we face around the world. I think Americans are very practical people. If you explain the nature of the threats that we're facing and the steps that are necessary to protect our way of life and make a cogent argument, they will accept that. They'll accept the burdens that are required. But if politicians, for their own reasons, don't talk about the international threats, don't alert their fellow citizens to the dangers that are out there, and we're caught by surprise, people want to know why they weren't alerted, why we weren't prepared, and why now their lives are potentially much more difficult than they were before. It wasn't always that way. Certainly during the Cold War, national security issues were frequently the highest priority in election campaigns. But as this just concluded campaign shows, national security almost didn't figure at all. And now we're going to have a question of what will be the priorities in 2024. I'll just give you one example why I think it's important. If you look at the amount of time that an American president spends on national security issues compared to everything else that he spends his time on, and then compare that amount of time to the amount of time spent debating national security issues in the campaign, the disjunction between the two is unbelievable. Presidents, I don't think anybody's ever calibrated it, but the amount of their time spent on intelligence briefings, on discussions about policy, on meeting with foreign leaders, a whole range of things that need to be done, is enormous, and with good reason, because ultimately in our system the president's the commander-in-chief and the executive branch is primarily responsible for foreign policy. But the amount of time the voters hear from the candidates on this subject is minimal. So we are collectively electing somebody whose views are at best very general and on specific issues almost never debated at all. I think the American people, being very practical, substitute for the debate a kind of character test. They look at the candidates and say, do we really trust that person to make life or death decisions. And hopefully they come to the right conclusion. But it's something that we've gotten away from adequate discussion on these issues, and it makes it very difficult for the people to really understand the implications of what they're voting on. I think where this got started was in the early 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Warsaw Pact disappeared. We were winners, essentially, of the Third World War of the 20th century. 1 and 2 had been hot wars. World War III was a Cold War, and we were victorious. And you may remember back in the early 1990s, many people said, well, we've reached the end of history because the ideological conflict of the Cold War was over. A number of our political leaders said, oh, fantastic, we don't need the kind of defense protection that we've had. We have what they call the peace dividend, which was a way of shifting resources from national security to welfare programs. And as a result, our defense spending went way down. Europe's defense spending dropped off the edge of the table, and people hoped that the world really had passed the point of history. We had a wake-up call on 9/11, sadly. We responded to it, as you would expect we would, but now, 20 years later, that's faded into memory as well. And the fact is that we do face a wider range of challenges and threats today than we have in a long time. And we, frankly, are not ready to deal with them. We do not have adequate defense expenditures. We do not have adequate intelligence expenditures. We don't have the capabilities we need to protect our interest all around the world. And we are also in a debate about why it should matter, frankly. The two parties are different in their approach to national security. There used to be in the Democratic Party what they called the Scoop Jackson wing, after the senator from Washington, a very hardline, pro-defense senator. There isn't any Scoop wing in the Democratic Party, Scoop Jackson wing in the Democratic Party anymore. It's all but disappeared. This is not a good thing for the country. It's not a good thing for the country. And in the Republican Party, we've seen in the past couple of years the resurgence, the modest resurgence, I hope it's modest, of a kind of isolationist approach to the world that says, well, what possible interest do we have in conflicts that are far away, in places that we know little about? I'm paraphrasing Neville Chamberlain's comments about Czechoslovakia in the 1930s. The U.S. has, because of the enormous size of our economy, has economic and political interest all around the world. We have friends and allies all around the world who share in this prosperity with us. We have global obligations for ourselves that we have to look after. Since 1945, to the extent there's been peace and security in the world at all, and there have been plenty of examples where there wasn't peace and security, but where it has prevailed now for 75 years or more, it's been because of American strength. It's been because of the strength of our alliances, the strength of our military capability, the strength of our resolve. Nobody else could put this together. It's not a real order. It looks like a Rube Goldberg device around the world, but we are at the center of it. Nobody else can do it. The United Nations certainly can't do it. Our friends in Europe and the European Union can't do it. And if they could, we don't want China and Russia to do it. So when we say, why do we have to worry about this? Why are we carrying all these burdens? Why are our NATO allies not spending as much on defense as they should? These are all legitimate questions, and they should spend more, and they should help us out more. But to be clear, we're not out there in the world as an act of charity to everybody else. We're out there for ourselves. Because if we didn't do it, there isn't anybody else who could. If we step back, we would create a vacuum, and somebody else will fill it. And they won't necessarily be our friends. This is exactly what just happened in Afghanistan. You know, people...
How do you expect us to trust us when we lie about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, essentially genocide in the Iraqi people? You covered up war crimes in Afghanistan, sir. Why did you celebrate the arrest of Julian Assange? Why do you think that's acceptable, sir? Is celebrating war crimes acceptable? Don't touch me, sir. Why did you do this, sir?
Another example of the First Amendment at work. We've heard debate and discussion here in America about endless wars and about why we need endless wars, and Afghanistan was one of the prime examples of that. And the reason's very simple. The reason that we went into Afghanistan after 9/11 was to prevent terrorist attacks on American soil from ever coming from Afghanistan again. And we did. And for 20 plus years, we continued to succeed in that mission. There were no terrorist attacks on American soil emanating from Afghanistan. Now, we didn't make Afghanistan into the Switzerland of Central Asia. It wasn't our objective. We couldn't do it anyway. It wasn't a perfect situation, that's for sure. There were always dangers and tensions. But the fact is, we had a presence there that allowed us to make sure that the terrorists couldn't take root. We could conveniently watch what was happening in Pakistan to the east and Iran to the west, two countries with nuclear weapons programs, Pakistanis with dozens of nuclear weapons already in their possession, which in the hands of terrorists would have been an enormous threat to the United States. Now we've left. The vacuum we've created will be filled by the Russians, the Chinese. Terrorists have begun to return to Afghanistan. The Obama administration itself warned that attacks on the United States from Afghanistan could be ready as early as this year, and that efforts to prevent those attacks from happening are much harder given that we're not in country and can't maintain the level of intelligence gathering that we'd like, or be present quickly enough to stop them before they took off. This is just one example of the range of threats that we face, that we need to have a debate in this country in the 2024 campaign, so we don't ignore threats out there or slide into situations where the people are not fully aware of the choices they're making. Let's take the war in Ukraine. Why are we providing military and economic assistance to the Ukrainians? Because we have believed since 1945 that stability and peace on the European continent are vital American interests. That's why we created NATO. Now, Ukraine's not a member of NATO, people say. Why do we have to defend it? And I'll just remind everybody first that a Texas President, George W. Bush, proposed bringing Ukraine and Georgia into NATO membership on a fast track in April of 2008, and our friends in Germany and France said they didn't want to do it. If Ukraine were a NATO member now, this attack never would have taken place. I feel very confident about that. Neither the Soviets nor the Russians have ever crossed a NATO border. Proof of that, if you need it, is that after the Russian invasion, Finland and Sweden abandoned 75 years of neutrality to ask to join NATO because they understood, and Finland has an 800-mile-long border with Russia, just to remind, that the only real security was being in NATO, the most successful political military alliance in the history of the world. If the Russians' aggression in Ukraine prevails, it's only the beginning of further Russian aggression against the rest of the former Soviet Union, not to create the USSR, but to recreate the Russian Empire. That's what Putin is about. And it's not just Putin. It's not a personal war. That's a widespread feeling in Russia. And there's no place on earth watching what happens in Ukraine more closely than Beijing, because they want to see whether the United States and the West as a whole can stand up to an act of naked aggression. They've got their own targets. Taiwan is really only one of them. In the East China Sea, the South China Sea, Southeast Asia, along their entire Indo-Pacific periphery, the Chinese have hegemonic aspirations. And if they see that the West is unable to deal with a threat like we're facing now in Ukraine, it will spur their ambitions. Donald Rumsfeld used to say, it's not American strength that's provocative, it's American weakness that's provocative. And the rest of the world is watching to see whether we have the resolve to protect our friends and our interests. Because if we do, if they believe that the cost to them are potentially much greater than whatever benefits they might get by committing aggression, they won't undertake the aggression in the first place. That's what deterrence is all about. That's why we have the nuclear capability that we do, to tell our adversaries that whatever they may have in mind, they ought to think long and hard again about it before they undertake the steps that they might be contemplating. This is something that I think Americans understand deeply, but if their politicians aren't talking to them about it, they're not going to be able to justify the kind of expenditures that we need on defense and intelligence. Now, we've got enormous budget deficits. We have for several years. We're adding to the national debt at an appalling rate. It's one reason, principal reason, Milton Friedman would say, why inflation is at the level it's at. So real leaders, I think, in Congress in the next 2 years should be thinking of ways dramatically to reduce some of the domestic spending that we've engaged in and get defense spending up to where it needs to be. We have not corrected, we did not correct adequately in the Trump administration for 8 years of underspending in the Obama administration. And we're underspending again in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. Just as one example, we have provided several thousand Javelin anti-tank missiles to the Ukrainians. They have proven to be enormously effective. I mean, I think when we hear complaints about wasteful Pentagon spending, and there certainly is, because it's a government agency and all government agencies have some wasteful spending, this is an example of an extraordinarily successful weapons program. But even in this conflict, where most of the javelins that we've provided are actually being sold to the Ukrainians, we've depleted, this is publicly available information, we've depleted 1/3 of our stockpile of javelins. So a prudent administration would say it's time to turn the production lines back on and get that stockpile up. And by the way, it should tell us the stockpile was too low to begin with. We go through this all the time. I remember in my first meeting with Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, when I took the National Security Advisor position, he said, you won't believe how unprepared we were when we took office, that the stockpiles of a whole range of weapons had been depleted. Now, this may sound like kind of boring Washington budget talk, but if you don't have the assets at the beginning of the conflict, if you don't have the assets adequate to deter the conflict, you're going to pay a price later on. And I think this is especially true now when we consider China, not because we're looking for a war with anybody. We're looking for how you prevent the war by what Ronald Reagan called peace through strength. And that was the right formula then, and it's the right formula now. What George Washington said in his first State of the Union message, that the best way to avoid war is to be prepared for it, and which is almost a literal translation from the ancient Roman aphorism, si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. The Chinese are at war with us already in many respects, certainly in economic terms. They have spent decades stealing our intellectual property, and from our European friends and Japan and others, which they then turn around and use to produce products that they sell into our markets at lower prices with government-subsidized financial terms. This is not free market capitalism. This is state capitalism and outright thievery used back against us. So it's not only the threat to Taiwan and other territories near China itself, it's really right across the board. They have weaponized some of their companies as arms of the Chinese state. For example, Huawei and ZTE are not telecommunications companies. They're part, in effect, of the State Intelligence Service. And sanctions against them are not intended to disadvantage them from competing in American markets. They're intended to prevent China from learning everything we say through our telecommunications system. We are late waking up to this kind of challenge. We've not had experience in the breadth of this challenge before in our history. I'll just give you one example. When I went with President Trump to Singapore for his first summit with Kim Jong-un, we were on Air Force One, and as they often say, you know, when you leave the plane, leave your laptop here, leave your phone here, we'll give you a burner phone and use that while you're in Singapore. And because we're a little worried about the Wi-Fi service, we're going to give you a MiFi so you have it with you all the time. Now, I didn't know what a MiFi was at the time. Maybe some of you do, maybe you don't, but it's a little thing you carry around with you. It's a hotspot that just goes with you wherever you are. And it's about the size of a hockey puck. And as I say, I had never had a MiFi before, so, you know, not being a technological expert, it looks like a piece of plastic, as I say, about the size of a hockey puck. And I turned it over, and on the back of it, this thing I'd gotten from the White House Communications Agency said ZTE. Well, you know, cut out the middleman, just send it straight to Beijing. If that's what we were thinking 4 years ago, you can see how far we've had to come. I personally think that the Chinese aspirations for hegemony in the Indo-Pacific and ultimately globally are the existential challenge for the United States and its allies this century. We've got to have a national debate on this issue. People have to learn what the nature of the threat is, because they're going to be called upon to take some pretty significant steps to protect the United States and its friends against this kind of threat. And if we're not prepared to do it, we need to understand that too. So this is, I'll just conclude here with the plea that all of us as citizens really need to insist that our politicians, and especially people who are aspiring for the presidential nomination in 2024, lay out what their national security policies are. You know, the only time you can really get politicians to listen to you is when they're running for office. So don't miss this opportunity as they come through Texas, and I know they will, to say, talk about it. Don't talk about just domestic issues. Give us credit for understanding we live in a big world where there are a lot of threats that the United States faces, and we want to hear from you what you're going to do to protect us from those threats. I don't have any doubt that the United States will rise to do what's necessary, but we can either do it the hard way or we can do it the easy way. And the easy way is to think it through, debate it, get agreement, and pursue the policy vigorously. So I'm sure with groups like IPI and others, all of you who support it, this is a wonderful opportunity to get started early, to get in on the ground floor of the 2024 campaign. And I urge you all to do it, and I thank you for having me here today.